Hi again, everyone. Patrick Pfingsten here. I write the Illinoize political newsletter, which you can find every day at theillinoize.com, ILLINOIZE. We have our daily updates, newsletters, and content that we put up on our newsletter every day for you to keep up on state government and politics and everything going on in the land of Lincoln. Thanks for joining us on our almost sort of kind of weekly podcast. We're happy you're here. We are still fully interested and kind of sucked in and focused on this migrant crisis in the city of Chicago, which we'll continue to talk about today. We'll be joined by Jennifer Gong-Gershowitz. She's a state representative from suburban Glenview. She's been named to chair a working group for House Democrats on how the state should respond to the ongoing crisis and what could and should be done there. So we'll be interested in getting her perspective on the crisis as it continues to shape up. And we'll talk to Eric Zorn. He's a longtime Chicago Tribune columnist who now writes his own Substack and newsletter that he comments on news, a lot more city focused, but also some state stuff too. Get his perspective on this kind of budding, simmering war between Governor J.B. Pritzker and Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson, which kind of really escalated this week when on Monday there was a report that hadn't really been confirmed by anyone that the state had that the city was not planning to open any new shelter space for migrants that are being shipped to the city. Remember, these are asylum seekers that are legally in the United States. Pritzker kind of called the mayor of Chicago out when asked about that on Monday.
I'm deeply concerned. We do not have enough shelter as it is in the city of Chicago. The city has not told the state where they would like us to put our resources to build new shelters or help them build new shelters. So we can't help if they don't identify those locations. And we need to make sure that we're not ending shelter capacity, as the city is now planning to do, at the end of winter. If you think this problem is going to end when the temperature warms up, it's not.
So Johnson, in response on Wednesday, essentially said, sure, if you want more shelter space, Governor, go ahead and build your own and do it outside of the city of Chicago.
Shelters do not have to solely be set up and built in the city of Chicago. The state can do it wherever they want. The state of Illinois committed to 2,200 beds. We could really use those right now. I believe we're upward of 10,000 families that have been resettled, but the flow of migrants that are coming into the city of Chicago and the flow to exit, that it has not kept up.
This has been an ongoing war of words between the two men over the last couple of weeks, at least, and it's interesting to kind of see that it seems as if the governor has tried to keep from laying a glove on Johnson over the last few weeks, but it almost seems like the governor's getting impatient with the city, and I'm wondering if this doesn't continue to escalate, how ugly it could potentially get in the coming weeks and months, or if the governor and the mayor, who are both staunchly progressive, by the way, could have a real feud here, and what the politics of this could turn into. But then there's also the effect on the people who are being put on buses and shipped here. It's hard to see that this is going to be good for them in the process. So we'll certainly be keeping an eye on that. I want to turn now to a conversation we recorded on Wednesday with State Representative Jennifer Gong-Gershowitz from suburban Glenview. If you're watching on YouTube, you'll kind of see the background change a little bit. We were actually in Evanston for another meeting, so we had to use a meeting room at the Evanston Public Library. So thanks to those folks for letting us work there for a little bit. But we talked to Representative Gong-Gershowitz, who's chairing a working group for House Democrats on this migrant crisis and interested in her perspective on how this will all kind of shake out. It's such a big issue, and I really appreciate the representative taking some time to sit down and walk through it with us. Representative, first, you're an attorney that is accomplished in immigration and human rights and those sort of things. So let me start from the legal part of this, because we talked about this before we started, that I don't think people at large are understanding the difference in the illegal immigration crisis and the migrant crisis. From your perspective, from the state perspective, how are these different?
Yeah, well, I think first of all, it's important to really understand the nature of this issue, right? When we talk about this issue, there are both moral and practical considerations. We're talking about a humanitarian issue, and I think it's important not to politicize what is fundamentally a humanitarian issue. The factors that drive migration, the geopolitical dynamics that occur worldwide are not things that are under control. But what we're seeing here in Illinois are the impacts of those factors that are occurring around the world, geopolitical dynamics like political instability, economic crises elsewhere. And for the vast majority of migrants who arrive in Illinois on buses, put there in large part after being processed at the border as a political stunt by the governor of Texas, are arriving here with court dates. They are asylum seekers. We at the state level don't determine ultimately what happens with those cases. That is solely at the discretion of the federal government. And asylum seekers will have their day in court, in immigration court. And in the meantime, we have to address the very real human needs of human beings who are here through factors that are very much outside of the state's control.
Well, let me ask specifically in terms of state government. The city has obviously been burdened with a lot of this, but the state has weighed in with a lot of funding and people time, and the Department of Human Services has been engaged. Where should the money be coming from here? I think the argument seems to be this is a federal issue. The federal government should be doing this, but the federal government doesn't seem to want to get off its rear end. So who should be shouldering the cost here?
Well, I think it's fair to say that immigration, being a federal responsibility, should have significant ownership for the costs associated with the humanitarian needs that states are really called upon to address, right? So here at the state level, we handle human services, healthcare, education, public safety. That is really our responsibility at the state level. We don't have any control over the immigration process at the border, foreign policy, and those decisions being exclusively within the purview of the federal government. I think it's only fair to expect that states receive significant support in dealing with the humanitarian needs of people who are here in our state.
So what do you anticipate this new working group of House Democrats, how well do you plan to approach this? I mean, obviously, we can ask the Biden administration or the Republicans in the House for as much money as we can until we're blue in the face. But if it's not showing up, somebody's still got to deal with it. So how does this group of House Democrats actually hope to address this issue?
Well, and that goes back to the two ways in which I think we have to look at this issue. One is a moral responsibility, and the other is our practical limitations, right? I don't think anyone is suggesting, and I would assume this applies to my friends on the other side of the aisle too, as well, right? That we would not turn our backs on a mother and child freezing in a Chicago winter, right? We have a moral responsibility to care for those human beings who are here in Illinois. And that moral responsibility extends regardless of whether somebody is seeking asylum or they're in our communities and are in need, right? And so the other is a practical concern, which is how do we provide do the best that we can with what we have and come up with a workable process. That's really the challenge, is meeting the needs and doing so in a way that is workable and providing the support to our municipalities in order to succeed.
It sounds like there doesn't seem to be a ton of appetite among the House and Senate Democrat caucuses at this point to pass a supplemental appropriation, at least in the near term. What's your opinion on that? Should the state be finding some more money, moving some more money to the city to help address this in the short term?
Those are things that I think are going to be discussed by the working group, and I don't want to, presume or get ahead of my colleagues who have been tasked with looking at this. I think it's fair to say that everything is on the table. We need to look both at policy as well as budget decisions, and we need to do so with an eye towards solving this in an inclusive way. We have a homeless problem in Chicago that needs to be addressed holistically. So I think if we look at this only in the silo of migration, we're perhaps missing an opportunity to zoom out and deal with the housing crisis that is really larger than the migrant population.
I mean, we've heard this from some communities, specifically in the city, that, we have our own problems to deal with, that, we have specifically, on the south and west sides, communities that are impoverished and no jobs and failing schools. And, why aren't we putting more money into those areas instead of to these people who, whether you want to say they aren't citizens, they're not Americans, whatever, this just seems like a very sensitive issue because there doesn't seem to be a winner here, right? In politics, there are winners and losers all the time, but there are no winners and lots of losers in this one, it seems.
Yeah, well, and there is is precisely the challenge. We're going to tackle this in a way that is inclusive, in a way that does not pit one community against another. I think how we frame the issue is important. I think if it is framed in terms of winners and losers, everybody loses. We have to do a better job at communicating with communities about our plans to make sure that we address the very real needs of all our residents, regardless of whether they are here seeking asylum. And I think the distinction between people who are processed at the border, who have their court date and are seeking asylum, and for whom a call to ICE would not yield the results that some of the political rhetoric is suggesting. I think we need to set aside, again, the politicization of a humanitarian issue. We need to bring our communities together around workable solutions, and we need to do so in a way that meets the challenges of today.
Do you believe the state has the money to even put more into this crisis if the legislature even wanted to? I mean, you passed a budget that was, kind of balanced by a hair in May. There's a projection of an almost $1 billion deficit next year. Is the money even there if you want it to be?
Yeah, I mean, that's the question, right? There is a practical aspect of this. I acknowledge the practical limitations of resources, right? If resources were unlimited, we wouldn't need a working group, and we wouldn't need a budget process. Those are hard conversations. We have had those hard conversations. We've made tough decisions. I came in after the Rauner years when our state finances were on life support. We have now gotten 9 credit ratings upgrades. We are rated in the A category by all credit rating agencies, a feat that was once deemed impossible in the state of Illinois. We have met impossible challenges before, and we've done so in a way that hasn't left anyone behind. We have balanced budgets according to our values. This is another challenge, but I have every bit of confidence in the members that have been appointed to this working group to look at doing the most that we can with the resources that we have. And back to your original point, I do think that the federal government bears some responsibility here. Border states receive billions of dollars to tackle the human needs of migrants at the border. It seems to me that those sources of funding ought to be available to states like Illinois, who are also working to meet the humanitarian needs of people in our state.
Were Republicans invited to take part in this working group? And if not, why not?
So the working group process has been a successful process through which the speaker has really tackled big issues where we're going to need to arrive at consensus within our caucus. We have 78 members. So as you can imagine, a meeting with 78 people to try and arrive at consensus would be challenging. So the working group process has worked effectively for us as a caucus in order to achieve consensus. And it's my expectation that we will have conversations with Republicans, but the working group process is not really a committee process per se. We have bipartisan committees, and these are really an internal process through which the speaker has really empowered members of our caucus that come from a diverse parts of our state. We have suburban members, Chicago members, downstate members. We have a member from Rockford, where we can bring together our caucus, have tough conversations, arrive at consensus, and then also have conversations across the aisle. And then we have the other chamber too. Let's not forget that conversations have to happen in the Senate as well. So this is really a starting point for us to build consensus in our caucus.
What's your timeline on a solution here? I mean, obviously there's been talk of supplemental appropriation in the short term. The buses are still coming. It's still cold. Obviously, the mayor and the governor now spatting over shelters and whether there should be more or not. Is this something the working group is going to have to get a move on ASAP, or is this a May type situation?
Again, I don't want to get ahead of our working group. We have short-term, medium-term, and long-term goals, and I think it's fair to say that this issue isn't going to go away on May 31st either. So we're going to sit down and leverage the tools that we have at our disposal. Again, the legislature, we focus on policy as well as the budget, and that process is usually a January to May process. So we're giving ourselves the time to get it right as well. But it's a fluid situation. And if there are ways or things that we have to talk about before May, we're ready to have that conversation as well.
A couple of more things. I know you got to get to another thing here quick, if you don't mind. There's talk of a $300 per child tax credit this spring that would potentially move through the legislature. Again, we get into the topic of what do we have money for and not, but we're also talking about a tax credit that could help a lot of middle and low income families. Where does that fit into the conversation as you see it, especially considering the potential for belt tightening coming in May?
Yeah, our challenge is to arrive at a balanced budget, and that will be part of the conversation. I think it's a worthy conversation to have. Looking forward to hearing more, but that will certainly be part of the conversation, as will this. Anything that has a budget impact is going to have to be looked at holistically, so that by May we meet the expectations of our constituents here in Illinois, which is that we continue to pass balanced budgets and keep our state's finances on track. And
finally, on the issue of abortion, there continues to be talk of a of a potential referendum on a constitutional amendment to enshrine abortion rights in the state constitution. Polling I've seen in this state shows 2/3 of people are somewhere in the middle, either pro-life with exceptions or pro-choice with restrictions. Is this a situation where the middle is sort of being drowned out, or how should this issue be approached, especially in terms of the Constitution?
Well, I actually think that the overwhelming majority of people have made their voices heard on this issue, and have made very, very clear that here in Illinois and even in states with Republican majorities, that we want women and their doctors to be making these decisions. And here in Illinois, we trust women. We codified the law as it existed under Roe versus Wade, such that it would be women and their doctors making healthcare decisions. So I actually think that the majority of women in the state of Illinois have made their voices on this abundantly clear, electing overwhelming Democratic majorities in both the House and the Senate, largely driven by these types of issues that I think we are absolutely mindful of how important this is to people in our communities.
State Representative Jennifer Gong-Gershowitz, a Democrat from Glenview. Representative, we appreciate the time, and hopefully we'll see you in Springfield soon.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Thanks to Representative Jennifer Gong-Gershowitz for her time, and thanks to the Evanston Public Library for allowing us to record our side of the conversation in their facility on Wednesday when we weren't able to be in our little office setup here. So appreciate that. Let's bring in Eric Zorn, who is a longtime columnist and guy who is well versed in Chicago politics, and get his perspective. Eric and I go way back. We did interviews back in the day when I was in radio many years ago, and we are on kind of different sides of a lot of these issues, and that's why I like to talk to him. So, Eric, I appreciate the time, and especially as we're all in the watch for your beloved Michigan team to have its football championship vacated at some point in the near future. So
it could happen. It could happen. And of course, if you want to take any pleasure in rooting against Michigan, you can always look at the basketball team, which is just absolutely dreadful. They had their worst loss in 17 years the other night to Purdue. So Michigan haters can rejoice.
As an Illinois basketball fan, I take great pride in the failures of Juwan Howard. So yes, I'm very happy in that. So I wanted to talk with you just because I know this has been forefront in your conversations, and it's really what's dominating the news cycles lately is the migrant crisis that the city is facing. The tensions this week between Governor Pritzker and Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson seem to kind of be simmering to almost a boiling point now. The mayor's office kind of insinuated that it was going to stop building new shelters, was going to kind of start to wind things down, essentially. The governor said that's a really bad idea. Then the mayor comes out and says, well, the state should be doing this, not us. How bad is this between these two?
Well, I get the feeling that it's pretty bad. And I think that one of the motivating factors is that Pritzker is very concerned about what Chicago is going to look like this summer when the DNC comes to town. That if you're going to have a whole bunch of reporters out there looking for stories, because as you know, there's really nothing newsworthy happening at these conventions, and yet news organizations feel duty bound to send reporters here. They're going to be out looking for stories. They're going to be on the streets of Chicago, and they're going to be seeing, tents up and down sidewalks, and they're going to be seeing sort of kind of chaotic situation that we started to see last summer, and that we're still seeing. And so I think Pritzker is alarmed about that. Johnson's got to be alarmed about it too. I just have the feeling that Johnson has not figured out just what he wants to do. That it doesn't seem like he's really got his mind around this problem. There's the whole Brighton Park disaster where he wanted to. house the migrants in this field that turned out to be too toxic, and Pritzker put a stop to that. These two Democrats need to figure out, need to get on the same page, and they need to also, I think they need to start, like say, pulling on the same oar, because this problem is not going to get any better. And as you know, there was a February 1st deadline for that. There's a 60-day stay limit that the mayor wants to put on the migrants in the shelters, and so once after 60 days, they got to get out and find other housing. And they've pushed that deadline back twice because of the weather. Now the deadline is a week from today, through February 1st, and I don't know exactly what kind of weather they're expecting on February 1st, but I looked at some of the averages. The average low temperature on February 1st in Chicago is 18.5 degrees. The overall average for the day is about 25.2, and the average high is freezing. So if we get an average February 1st day, and you think you're going to take these migrants who are living in shelters and just like shove them out on the street and say, go find a place to live, or go get back in the line to get shelter, it's going to be inhumane. It's going to look much worse than what situations we've got now. So I'm saying that they're not going to do that at all. That this is a bluff. This is an attempt to put some urgency into the lives of people who I don't know have any other way to support themselves right now. Either way to find a place to live. It's not like there's a lot of vacant apartments that you can rent and you don't have much money. So it's a really weird situation. And I just feel like there's not a lot of command and control from the fifth floor of City Hall.
And it's also not like Chicago's immune from snow in February either. I mean, it wasn't the big like 2-foot snowfall that shut down Lakeshore Drive 10 years ago. I think that was in February. I mean, it's not like, it's not like we're jumping into spring on Groundhog Day. So I get this comment a lot from people, and you are someone that follows city politics far closer than I do. But especially detractors think Brandon Johnson is just completely unequipped for this job. Clearly they don't know what they're doing in this regard, because no one knows what they're doing in this regard. This is unprecedented. There's no help from the federal government. This is there's no path on this one. There's no pre-existing data. But how do you rate the job that he's doing?
Well, it's obviously it's incomplete, right? He took office in May. He knew that this crisis was looming. You have to sort of, and you got to compare it to how Lori Lightfoot did when she took over, and then it was shortly after her. Maybe it was about a year after she was inaugurated. The COVID crisis hit. She was able to own that, at least for a little while, and her popularity, her image, all went up. I think you have to look not just at the handling of the migrant crisis, but sort of overall, what are we seeing from the Johnson administration? We're seeing that he's not nearly as transparent as he wanted to be. That there's all sorts of issues with lack of transparency, and there's also some of these symbolic moves that he's been making. This attempt to fight the police contract, which is, I understand their point of view strongly. I just think they're just going to waste a lot of city money with lawyers fighting something where they're just going to dead bang lose in the courts. And there's just all these other ways in which it does feel like it's very difficult to translate the rhetoric and the sentiments of a political activist, which is what Brandon Johnson was, and into executive leadership. It seems like it might be easy and fun to be the mayor, although I think if you think about it for a little while, you realize that it's a really, really hard job, and that it's not a job that's particularly well tailored for ideologues. If you want to be an ideologue, you should probably be in the legislature or try to run for Congress, where you can jump up and down and scream, and you're not really responsible for running the show. And so if the question is, was Brandon Johnson ready to be mayor? I think the answer is clearly no. Is he going to be a good mayor? I think that's still to be determined, because we do have some time. But right now, I'm nervous about the future under Brandon Johnson, I got to say.
How do you see this migrant situation unfolding? Because, the city clearly doesn't have a lot of extra cash sitting around. The state budget that was passed in May was kind of a whisker from being, out of whack, and they're projecting an almost $1 billion deficit in the next fiscal year. Congress can't get off its rear end and handle this, the asylum process, which you and I haven't talked about, but I've talked about incessantly lately, is a federal issue, a federal law, that Congress should be taking care of this issue, and it's not. Um, Nobody seems to be stepping up to handling this issue, and it's hard when you're the city and state and you don't have any extra money, and the federal government isn't willing to do what it takes to handle the issue. I look at these people that are getting shipped to the city, and I feel like there's no solution for them.
Well, first of all, I think it was a fairly clever poker play on Governor Abbott's part to remind the nation and remind some of these big urban centers that this problem at the border, the situation they have at the border, is not just a Texas problem or an Arizona problem or a New Mexico problem or a California problem. It's a problem that is a federal problem, as you just said, and that the burden of handling that needs to be shared by everybody in the country. And it has been a failure of the Biden administration and of Congress to recognize that and to realize that you can't ask the citizens of Chicago or the citizens of Illinois to pay an unfair share of the burden of having these people come here and they can't work, and they are right now burdens on. I mean, I like to call this the migrant challenge rather than the migrant crisis, because I do think that over time you will see, if these people are granted asylum and become citizens, and they'll become productive and a net benefit to Chicago, which needs workers. A lot of places need workers right now. And so I think that there is an opportunity here, but it's being squandered by the politicians, by those who are unwilling to realize that this needs to be a shared burden, and it needed to be a shared burden all along. And Governor Abbott, like I say, I don't necessarily love his tactics, but I think he does have a point that this should not be Texas's problem. This should be the federal government's problem. They should be dealing with it, and it should be a shared burden. So he has definitely illustrated that. He's called out cities like Chicago that talk about how welcoming they are. Say, okay, well, let's test how welcoming you are, and we're going to send a bunch of people up here and see how you handle it.
Mm-hmm. And to be fair, from Abbott's perspective, not only is he dealing with migrants who are coming to the border and saying, we want asylum, they're also dealing with the people who are coming in illegally, the ones that cross the Rio Grande, that are coming in with coyotes, whatever. So they've got double the issue, but they're also getting billions of dollars from the federal government to handle immigration issues. So it's kind of a mixed bag there too. But again, Chicago and the state are not getting those funds. So it goes back to the federal government saying, what the hell are you guys doing?
Yeah, well, I think they don't know. And right now, of course, Congress is at a stalemate, trying to come up with some sort of a compromise solution or some sort of progress on the situation at the border. That immigration is it's a huge issue. I hear from readers all the time, and I know that even though there are lots of places in the country where it's not really a day-to-day issue for people, migrants are not necessarily in their communities. Illegal immigration is not a problem in their communities, yet it's still something that really animates people. They feel very threatened by it. They feel this sort of baffled rage at the idea that we can't have a secure border. And I certainly understand that. That people feel like, we have to have a country, and you can have two thoughts in your mind at once, which is that we need more immigration. We definitely need people, and we need workers and immigrants. This is a country of immigrants, and we should not look down on immigrants, but we also want there to be an orderly and legal process. And I don't think that that is an inhumane or a cruel thought. And of course, how to make it a legal process, how to make it an orderly process, how to make it a humane process is a challenge. But it's one that we need to work together on, and the parties simply are not doing that right now. I don't know that they will before the election, because it's just an issue that animates voters. So I think that's where we are on that.
I take a lot of heat from conservatives, who are just harping on illegal immigration, shut the border, et cetera, et cetera. And I my first question to them is, where did your family come from? Because we all came from somewhere. Mine came from Germany in 1868. It's everybody came from somewhere. So it's not like immigration is not part of all of our backgrounds, unless you're a Native American. And this could open an entire can of worms, and we won't go down that road. But the whole idea that the ideology and the tribalism that has polluted this issue really makes it hard to get anything done, doesn't it?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that's where we are. I think that right now you're seeing that the Republicans really don't want any kind of compromise or deal on border security or border issues, because it's a good issue for them in November. And Democrats seem, they don't want to go all the way with Republican ideas, but they want to meet halfway. But I think Republicans realize that, I mean, if it's just a matter of politics, politics, it's like having a crisis at the border, or having a perceived crisis at the border, plays well for Republicans. So that's where we are. I think, you got to remember that when Donald Trump was president, there were 2 years there where he had control of the Senate and the House, and they didn't manage to get done what he says needs to get done. So it's not like this is an obvious solution that the Democrats are avoiding. And of course, the Democrats haven't been able to get a handle on it either. It's a very, very difficult problem, because you have some national values that you deal with. Like, we are a country. We have the Statue of Liberty in the harbor in New York City, that we lift our lamp behind. She lifts her lamp by the golden door. That we bring us your what is it? Your tempest tossed, your wretched refuse from the teeming shores, and so on. This is part of our national DNA, and we can't ignore that. And you see people who are desperate, who are coming here, and to turn them away is not necessarily American. On the other hand, to fling open the gates and say, "Come on in," and yet we're not going to let you work, and we're not going to let you have any legal status here. That doesn't work either. So I think we should have good, strong borders. I think we should, but I think we should have the gates have the same sort of openness that they had when my family came over, when your family came over. Most of us came from elsewhere, and we came when we came legally. My family came legally. I'm sure. I don't know if there was even any immigration laws. And was it 1848? Your family came over.
1868, but yeah,
68.
I mean, it's
guessing that they probably just arrived by boat, and there wasn't anybody there to ask them who they were. But
yeah.
My family came over in 1934, and legally but it was a different immigration system, and of course they came from Europe, and my family came from Germany as well, which I think was viewed somewhat differently by the public than Central and South America residents are.
For sure. Two quick political questions, if you let me, before we let you go, Eric. J.B. Pritzker clearly has his eyes on something bigger than governor of Illinois. Do you believe his play is to run for president in 4 years?
Yes, I think he's going to at least make an exploratory bid at that. He's going to have some competition with, Gavin Newsom, and there's a whole raft of Democrats who are waiting in the wings. But yeah, I think he does it. And I used to tell people that one way you might be able to tell he's going to run for president if he starts losing weight, the way remember Jesse Jr. who was sort of a roly-poly guy, if you remember, and then he began losing weight. I think he may have even had bariatric surgery. But
Chris Christie had bariatric surgery too.
But didn't take for him, I guess, as much.
Well,
but
it did fail. But yeah, that's
but for Jesse Jr. it didn't, and people were saying that this was a sign that he was going to run for mayor. I do think that Pritzker. I think Pritzker's a good orator. I think he's got a pretty good record to run on in Illinois, all things considered. I'm sure he's looking at it, and he's going to be an attractive candidate financially because he's got a lot of money to start with. So yeah, I would look for him to be a 2028 contender, and we'll see if he shows up in New Hampshire. They're not doing Iowa anymore, so might start showing up somehow at Nashua at chicken dinners and so on. But yeah, I definitely think so.
Does he run for re-election then in 26?
Oh yeah. I'm sure he does.
You think he does? I don't think he does.
You don't? Why not?
I don't know that the headache is worth it if you want to get on the national stage. I mean, essentially, remember Barack Obama announced for president in February of 2007. So that was a month after we would have had a gubernatorial inauguration. I mean, so he can easily transition from governor to candidate.
Well,
I don't know that he will, but I think it's certainly a possibility that he wouldn't.
Well, he's going to, when he does run, if he does run in 26, he's going to be barraged by questions of, will you pledge to serve out your whole term?
And he didn't answer those this year. I mean, or last year. I mean, he didn't get far into that. He didn't wade deep into those waters in 22.
Right. I'm sure they'll workshop an answer, something like, my current plan is to do this, and then suddenly plans can change. That happens all the time in politics. But yeah, I think his presidential ambitions are alive.
And it's an election year, obviously. I feel like the environment in Illinois, we live in this two states essentially where with Donald Trump at the top of the ticket, that will probably do really well for Republicans in the southern part of the state, or at least south of I-80, but will be horrible for Republicans in the suburbs. Do you think Trump drives the issue? Do you think abortion drives voters? What do you think is the issue on voters' minds? Because I saw recent polling that showed the number one issue on voters' minds isn't economy, isn't abortion, isn't taxes. It's threats to democracy. So it's really, and that's Illinois voters. So it's really interesting. I wonder what you think in terms of what will be top of mind for voters.
I'd be interested to know what the crosstabs are on the threats to democracy, because that certainly is something that you hear a lot in Democratic circles, that Donald Trump is an active threat to democracy. I don't know if you can argue that Joe Biden, who I think is a fairly conventional liberal Democrat, is a threat to democracy, but obviously there's a lot of heated rhetoric going on. I think
Illinois, it's Trump focused. It's clearly Trump focused.
Illinois is not going to be a battleground state by any means. It's not. We're not going to see a lot of political ads here, if any. We're not going to see any campaigning here, if any. I think you're going to see Biden winning this state with 55, maybe even higher percentage of the vote, and that reality is probably going to depress Republican turnout in general. Like, people. There's just in general, that tends to be what happens. And so there's a self-reinforcing quality to a state that's solidly one color or the other, which is that Republicans say, I should go vote for Congress. Heck with it. There's not that much enthusiasm. And the state Republican Party is still, in the doldrums in terms of, not having Bruce Rauner, not having Ken Griffin anymore to throw money at them. So I think it's going to be another Democratic route in Illinois, and abortion is going to be part of that. Although I don't think Illinois residents feel like abortion rights are threatened here, but there's still a desire to keep that strong. And I don't imagine that if Dick Durbin runs again, I don't know if he's going to have any trouble at all. That would be, of course, 2 more years. It's just this state it's basically a blue state.
Yeah, it's really interesting because we'll have maybe one competitive congressional race in the 17th. I doubt the 11th turns into anything. I doubt the 6th turns into anything. So it's really, or even the 14th. So it's really, there's not a lot at the top of the ticket in Illinois to drive things in November. So I'll put your Substack link up on the screen. Tell me about what you write in your Picayune-Sentinel.
Well, today I'm just this week I'm just going through a bunch of news stories talking about the possibility of a new stadium in the 78. I'm talking about the way the city is screwing up with this police contract negotiation thing where they're filing suit, and I'm just looking at a bunch of different issues. And then I always have things like the tweet of the week and funny stuff and the tune of the week, and I try to mix it up. It's a little bit of a magazine-y newspaper type thing where I try to have a bunch of different things. And I like to focus on Chicago issues, but state issues come up all the time as well. So
that 78 rendering is a beautiful ballpark for nobody to go to. So
yeah, right. But sometimes if you build it, they'll come. I love the idea of using that land for something like that. I'm wondering why the Bears never seem to express much interest in it.
Yeah, is it big enough? I'm not sure. I'm not deep into that at this point. So
it's easily big enough. The question is whether I think Chicago needs to have a domed football stadium, because that way you can host more political conventions. You can host the Final Four. You can host tractor pulls. You can host huge concerts.
The college football championship, you've got stadium concerts, etc.
Super Bowl, all these things that you can have that we can't have here. I think it would be a great investment for the city, but I don't want to have too many taxpayer dollars going toward it either. These are private businesses, and they need to pull their own weight.
Eric Zorn, longtime Chicago Tribune columnist, now writes a Substack, ericzorn.substack.com. Eric, appreciate the time as always, my friend, and we'll talk to you soon.
Great, thanks.
All right, thanks to Eric Zorn, ericzorn.substack.com for his content, and also thanks to Representative Jennifer Gong-Gershowitz for joining us on our show today. We appreciate their perspective and their time as well. And we appreciate you for taking the time to watch if you're on YouTube, or listen if you're on a podcast platform, and appreciate your support. Go to our website, theillinoize.com. Subscribe to our newsletter up on the top right of our website, where you can get our daily emails and our subscriptions to the newsletter and stay up to date on what's going on in our great state. I'm Patrick Pfingsten. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll talk to you next time.